If you've ever wondered what happens to a phone screen when it gets caught in a recliner, here you go. The screen gets crunched and the frame gets bent. If you're keeping track, this is the 5th Motorola phone in our family to crack a screen within the last year. So I've been trying to learn how to replace screens on these, and this is my 3rd attempt. This one went pretty smoothly. This is a 5G Power Series 2023 model. It's pretty similar to the other Moto G that I took apart in my last video. The first step is to heat up the adhesive that holds on this plastic backing, and you can run a plastic tool or a pick around the outside. There's just a strip of adhesive all the way around the edge. So a heat gun and a little bit of prying takes it off pretty easily. I should say up front that I couldn't find any videos on YouTube on how to change the screen on this model, so I was kind of playing it by ear. The next step on this is to take out all these tiny screws. It's a Torx bit. The Torx driver came with the screen replacement that I bought off Amazon. That screen replacement was about 23 bucks, 24 bucks, something like that. As you saw there, you peel off the camera cover, that just snaps in place, so if you pull it up, it snaps out, and then you can get to the rest of the screws. I didn't know it at the time, but this white casing is just one big piece of plastic that snaps around the edge of the phone. So you need to take all the screws out of the top portion of the phone and the bottom portion of the phone. And then we can pry in between the frame and the white plastic and snap it out. I've done this 4 or 5 times as I replaced the screen, and I never really got much better at it. The only thing I found is you really need to detach the top part of the phone first, and then it kind of snaps out. But it usually took me 5 minutes of wrestling with it before I could unsnap it. There are 5 or 6 connectors we're going to deal with. That first one I just took off is the fingerprint sensor. That second larger one there is how the screen attaches. And then up under the black cover, there's a ribbon cable that goes from the top circuit board to the bottom circuit board. You'll see that when we get the battery out. Speaking of the battery, as I said in my last video, you really need to be patient. You don't want to deform this battery. It could really catch fire if you're not careful. So my method is to work some alcohol down under it and let the alcohol do the work. This takes about 5 or 10 minutes, but just be patient with it. Just keep pouring a little bit of alcohol, keep prying up the battery gently to let that alcohol get in there and wear away that adhesive. And if you're just patient, it eventually just lets go. The battery has one connection at the top. You can see it sticking up right there. From a connector standpoint, this phone isn't too bad. There's the thumbprint sensor, which I disconnected. The battery has a single connector. The screen attaches with one large connector, and then there's a ribbon cable that runs from the top circuit board to the bottom circuit board. It has connectors at both ends. In addition to that, there are 2 very small coaxes that run from the bottom board to the top board. But those are really all the connectors you need to disconnect. These are those 2 snap-on coaxial cables I was talking about. There's a black one on the top, white one on the bottom. You just pry them off, and then they run in a channel along the side of the phone. Now that we have everything disconnected, we can take out that top circuit board. Now for the fun part. There are 3 design elements of this phone that are just painful. There's a battery in the bottom of the phone, and it's glued down with its connector. There's the volume control and power button on the side that's glued onto the frame. And there's also the speaker for when you're on the phone that's glued down to the frame. So I'll talk about all 3 of those in detail. That bottom circuit board is actually 2 pieces, so once you have all those screws out, you can just pull those bottom circuit boards out. And then you're down to the 3 hard components that I talked about before. Alright, so the first challenge is that battery. It's a small battery and it has 2 terminals sticking out on a flexible circuit board, and that's all glued down. So again, you want to use some alcohol to dissolve the adhesive under it. This one took a while to get out, but this one's actually easy to put back in when we start putting things back together. Of the three, what I consider to be terrible design elements, this one's probably the least troublesome. You can see after some prying it comes right out. Alright, now for the fun ones. Up at the top of the phone, the volume and power buttons are connected by this thin strip of metal that wraps around the frame and then is glued down to the inside of the phone. So again, alcohol, razor blades, plastic picks. Just be really careful not to cut it or damage it. Take your time. One of the challenges though is as you wear away the adhesive with alcohol, we need to put this thing back together. So I struggle a little bit with how to reconnect this after I've dissolved all the adhesive. Just go slowly and eventually you can just remove these 3 buttons that are on the side and the small wrapped around metal portion. Again, pretty terrible design, but it all got back together in the end. And then finally, similar thing with the speaker up top. The speaker sits in a square recess, and then it has 2 small connector pads that stick out to the side, and those are glued to the frame. So similar story, alcohol, patience, unglue those. This one's a real pain to put back in, as you'll see in a minute. All right, if you get to that point, you're completely done with the disassembly, and now it's time to put it all back together. Everything's pretty much in reverse. Again, those 3 design elements are by far the hardest part to get right. Again, the adhesive was all worn away, so I went with a double-sided tape approach. I put a little bit of double-sided tape down on the frame so those 2 connectors that come out the side of the speaker could stick down onto the phone. And you really have to get them tucked in tight to the speaker so that they line up with the circuit board that sits on top of it. Again, in my opinion, this is a pretty terrible design to have a circuit board just sit on top of 2 connectors that need to be in exactly the right spot. I had a similar approach for the volume and power controls. I slipped a small strip of double-sided tape up under them to adhere it over there. There might be some better tape or glue that could work for this, but this approach did work. So I'm gluing down the side buttons, and then if you look where that metal strip wraps around, I'm also putting some double-sided tape up under that small metal portion inside the phone. Now I went through this entire process, put the whole phone back together, and the touch screen didn't work. And it turns out I had a defective screen. So images would come on the screen, but it wasn't responsive on the touch screen. So I had to undo all of this, return that screen, and get another screen. So I had to do this whole process twice. I left in footage from both of the screens that I installed, just so you could see it more clearly. Here's some slow motion of the final product. You can pause it there if you want to see how I connected things. This was my second round when I was a little quicker at doing things. Again, that first screen was defective, so when I got the second one, I just stuck the double-sided tape down and stuck the power strip on, inserted that battery down at the bottom, put the speaker in, and then started working the circuit boards. You see me put a couple of screws in these circuit boards, but those are going to have to come back out. The screws actually go in after that white frame, but I did put in a couple of screws just so I could test the thing without all of the pieces flopping around. And I recommend that. You'll see here I put in the top circuit card and just hold it in with a couple of screws. Next step is to reconnect those tiny coaxes. They just snap on, but it was tough. With my giant fingers, it took some time, so just be patient. Eventually they line up and snap right on. Then you connect the ribbon cables. Again, there's the one that connects the speaker, and then there's the ribbon cable that goes from the top board to the bottom board. And you want to try to route those so they sit flat in the battery compartment. Now is a good time to just reconnect the battery and reconnect the fingerprint sensor and check if things actually work. This was my second screen, so this one actually had some response. But again, if something's not working, I also recommend you check that the speaker's working. Call the phone, listen if that top speaker's working or not. I put this all back together and the top speaker wasn't working, so I had to take it all back apart and make sure that those taped down contacts were exactly aligned with the circuit card. It was a little bit painful. All right, now that we know everything works, we tape the battery back in place, connect the battery. We attach the thumbprint sensor to that white frame, and then snap the frame back in all the way around. Oh, I should mention, make sure you take all the screws back out before you connect that white frame, because again, the screws go on top of the white frame. So those few screws I put in to hold the circuit boards temporarily, take them out, snap on the white frame, and then put the screws in. I didn't do that at first, and it tripped me up for a while. And now if everything's still working, you're kind of home free. Put all the screws back in. We're going to snap that camera cover back in place. Check one last time that everything's working. And then you just have to glue that plastic cover back in place. I'm using a B7000 glue. It's kind of like a rubber cement. And that works pretty well. You can unglue it if you need to, if you made a mistake. And it holds on there pretty tightly. This glue only takes 10 or 20 minutes to dry, so what I typically do is put that plastic part on there and put some clothespins to hold it on. After letting that dry for about 15 or 20 minutes, I came back and took all the clothespins off, and there's a little bit of glue squeeze out. You can clean that up pretty easily with alcohol. And that's it. I'm happy with the result. It saved the phone for 25 bucks. And other than those contacts that are glued to the frame, it's pretty easy to do. Those glued down contacts are a pain, but hopefully this helps someone out, saves their phone. Thanks for watching.